You are about to enter the Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast on ShockwaveSkullSessions.com. And now your host, Bob Nalbandian.
Shockwave Skull Sessions, episode number 59. On this episode, we got returning guest Ian Christe, who is the publisher of Bazillion Points Books, who released tons of great metal books, and also on-air DJ at Sirius XM's Liquid Metal. And joining Ian, we have newcomer Buffo from Germany. Great having Buffo aboard on this discussion on European metal. Of course, those that don't know Buffo, he is the editor for Rock Hard, or one of the editors over at Rock Hard magazine. Also the manager for the great German band Tankard that have been together since the early 80s. He's been managing them since 1986. So, as you could probably well presume, this podcast is a discussion on 80s European metal. So, a great episode. And I'm not going to bore you with a long intro because this runs about an hour long, a little over an hour. So, let's get right to it. Again, Shockwave Skull Sessions can be heard at our homepage, ShockwaveSkullSessions.com. Also, you could subscribe on Spreaker, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, or Apple Music, Podbean, and many other podcast directories out there. So with that said, man, let's get right to it. Ian Christe and Buffo, Shockwave Skull Sessions number 59. All right, Shockwave Skull Sessions, we got a great episode here. A lot of people were asking me about the 80s European metal scene. So I thought we'd do a podcast on not just the new wave of British heavy metal, since we've already touched on that, but 80s German metal, 80s French metal, 80s Swiss metal, Dutch metal. We're going to go through the whole gamut here. We got two perfect guests for this. We got returning guest Ian Christe. What's happening, Ian?
Hello. Hi. Greetings.
All right. Good to have you back. We had you on a previous episode. That was with Howie, right? Howie
we
Abrams?
talked about New York hardcore.
That's right. And of course, you got a lot of things going on. You're back in are you living in Switzerland now, or?
Well, right now I'm riding out this coronavirus in Switzerland. Yeah.
Right.
We kind of got hit early, and just in the last day or two, stores started reopening. I guess just the same as you, Buffo, in Germany.
Yeah.
It was scary early on. It's always been 2 or 3 weeks ahead of the States. And it looks like the sky was the limit as far as infections. And then all of a sudden it started to level out. And then now it's dropped off to almost nothing.
Wow, that's great. That's great.
Something to look forward to if you stay home and drink beer in the dark.
There you go. Good advice. Good advice. And speaking of beer drinking, the Tankard man, Tankard's manager and, of course, editor for Rock Hard magazine, just goes by, he's a one-namer, a classic German one-namer. It goes by the name of Buffo. What's up, Buffo?
Hey, it's an honor to be with you guys together at your great podcast. Listened to a couple of them, and they're really entertaining. Love them.
Last podcast we had, of course, we had Alex G., who you know well, Buffo. He was Shock Power magazine back in the day, and talked about some old school German metal there. Now, talk a little bit. You started Rock Hard. When did you start at Rock Hard, and how did you get involved with Rock Hard?
That's a good question. Due to my six-year-old brother, and the first record I listened to was Strong Arm of the Law of Saxon, of the band Saxon from the UK. And I was getting pretty fond of metal, and lots of other bands popped up over the next 2 or 3 years, like Iron Maiden and Motorhead and plenty of others. And then I came in touch with the guys doing a guy doing a fanzine called Götz Kühnemund. Heavy Metal Maniacs Germany was the name of his fanzine. And I think I wrote 2 record reviews for this fanzine. And then he joined forces together with another fanzine called Rock Art Magazine with Holger Stratmann and Uwe Lerch and a few others. So I was with Rock Hard magazine pretty much from the beginning. So that must have happened in, I think, 83 or 84, something like that. It was pretty early in the day.
That sounds about right, because I remember when I was doing my fanzine Headbanger, Rock Hard was a fanzine as well. Started out as a fanzine, a lot of people don't know. And then, and I remember being a pen pal with Götz early on and a couple other people involved, and boom, it just took off. I mean, Metal Hammer back in the day was kind of the big magazine, and now I believe Rock Hard's biggest metal magazine in Germany, correct?
Not anymore. I mean, because of the internet and everything, And then we had a couple of years back, Guts and a few others. I mean, they couldn't work for Rock Hard magazine anymore. So they founded a known magazine called Death Forever, which is a really good metal magazine as well. So there was a little split, or however you're going to call it. And I think Metal Hammer might be the biggest one these days. And I also know that I think the magazine called Rocket is pretty big. I think they're bigger than Rock Hard. But we still manage to go by. It's difficult for print magazines these days. And we at a certain point in history, I think we were number one magazine in Germany as far as sales goes and everything else. But I'm not sure if we still are. I doubt it. I think other magazines sell more copies, but we're still there, and that's the most important thing.
From what little I know about it, the German music market is about. It's way bigger in proportion to the States. I think Germany has 80 million people?
83, yeah.
So, but the music business is about 80% the size of the American, if I'm right about that. It's not at all in scale to the population. It's still a big going force. And I've looked into it because not that long ago, Midnight, the Ohio devil-obsessed new Metal Blade signing was in the top 40 in Germany. And I wondered, what does that actually mean, though? And it was them, Madonna, modern, Pet Shop Boys reissues of some kind. And just looking up the size of their industry, it was huge. Yeah, and also, I guess, in Germany, CDs are still really big.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. And vinyl has a revival for the last couple of years. So you sell quite a good amount of vinyls if you're on a metal band like Creator or Destruction
and vinyl's really big in the States, but CDs, they're a pile of them for $10. Unless it's 80s Mekong Delta or something like that. That's
right. Heard that from other people. A friend of mine, Mark Palmer, he's running Nuclear Blast UK.
Sure.
And he that, and I heard that from the States, that people are not so fond of CDs anymore. People still buy CDs quite a lot over here in Germany, because if they're fans of a band, they usually buy CDs and not downloads and stuff like that. So German heavy metal fans, they're pretty traditional when it comes to this, and a lot of people are collectors. I mean, of course, Americans are collectors as well, and Dutch people, but I think the Germans are pretty fond of CDs, still are, and vinyl is bigger again. But I remember back in the 80s, I was amazed when I was the first time in the US how big cassettes were in the US, because cassettes were never really a big issue here in Europe. It was more vinyl, and then the CD came up, and then it was the CD, but cassettes were huge in the 80s, and I think also in the 90s in the US.
Well, because everyone had cassette decks in their car before the CDs came out, right. So a lot of people would buy, and we would all tape cassettes and trade cassettes, of course. And Ian, you got the book publishing company Bazillion Points, and your Murder in the Front Row book is out now on DVD and streaming, I believe. I know I saw it on Amazon Prime.
Just came out Friday. It's a totally separate operation than the book, but basically the movie, it's a documentary film interviewing everybody in the photos. So Dave Mustaine and Kerry King and Tom Araya and everybody in Metallica is telling the stories behind all of the photos. And I look at it like it's something that's been in the works now for 3 or 4 years, directed by Adam Dubin, who did the Beastie Boys No Sleep Till Brooklyn video, or Fight for Your Right to Party video. He was actually Rick Rubin's roommate back when Def Jam Records first began at NYU. And then he, in the early 90s, did this 10-hour-long pair of Metallica documentaries, one about the making of the Black Album and one about the tour that came after that. In a lot of ways, that's the beginning of reality DVD extras, or it's really like a reality show about Metallica.
Yeah, our year and a half with Metallica, what was it called? Something like that?
Something like a lot amount of time with Metallica.
Yeah, that was a great it was like a double VHS cassette. I remember I got, and it really showed the band working, doing the Black Album. That was awesome.
So he made that, and then he just made this film. But he was moved and inspired to make a movie about the Bay Area thrash metal scene, and did a great job. Went out and found the kids of Debbie Abono, who was a woman in her 50s that managed Possessed and Forbidden Evil early on, and Got Cliff Burton's parents, or his father,
dad.
Ray Burton, who just passed away recently.
Yeah.
And that movie has been like showing in film festivals around the world in 2019. And then on Friday it came out as DVD and streaming. So
Right on. Well, check it out. I know it's on Amazon Prime, and I'm sure you could find it on other outlets worldwide. Well, let's get into this, man. I mean, it's funny because we were all pen pals back in the day. We all traded the tapes, and you were living in the '80s, early '80s. You were living in Switzerland, is that correct, Ian?
No, I was an American kid living in. There were 500,000 Americans living in central Germany back then, and I was part of that whole system. I lived up just outside of Ramstein, where the band,
right,
Air Force Base that the band is named after, and lived up on the Nahe River in Bad Kreuznach near Frankfurt. And first concert was AC/DC at the Frankfurt Fest Hall with Y&T in '82, I guess.
Yeah.
And every week spent my lunch money on not just all of the records that I needed to get, like the 8 Scorpions records that were already out and the 6 Judas Priest records that were already out. When you come into it as a kid and need to like catch up with everything, but also all the 12 inches that were available in the States as imports, but in Germany they were just the new record.
Sure.
There would be like 3 12 inches along with every Iron Maiden album. And there was just so much metal around, growing around like 82, 83 when I was in junior high. So I think maybe something that really sets the tone for Germany in 1982, 1983 versus America is every American kid has seen Fast Times at Ridgemont High, right?
Right.
The German version of that is Christiane F., about like a 14-year-old heroin addicted prostitute. That famous movie with David Bowie and like her and her friends represent, which is like that was the big youth movement was that kids identified with, and every German kid saw that with their parents.
I've heard of that movie. I got to check that out. Is that still available?
Yeah, it's great. I think that the woman may even still be alive.
Possible. I read the book in school. I remember.
Yeah,
it's taken place in Berlin, and I think the girl is a prostitute, as Ian said, and I think she is addicted to heroin and stuff. So that was a pretty iconic movie and book for the German youth. But I personally never digged it so much because I started pretty late with like drinking alcohol and taking bits of drugs here and there, but never massive. So. But I know a lot of people also from abroad really dig that movie and the book. So that's still German history, German culture, I think.
We used to buy Bravo magazine, not even understanding what was going on, but there would be like big pinup posters of Christiane F. And then on the flip side, like, Iron Maiden with Paul Di'Anno and Eddie, like those what magazines in the world had giant color posters of Iron Maiden in 1982?
Yeah, especially teen magazines, because that was kind of a more or less a teen magazine. I mean, we had Circus and all that, and you would have maybe a full page of Steven Tyler or something like that, and then on the flip side, you'd have Tony Danza or something. But
this would be like Duran Duran,
right.
Shaking Stevens, who was like this baby boomer kind of Elvis type of old time rock and roll.
I remember him,
kitschy guy, and then Christiane F., Iron Maiden, and then like 5 pages explaining how to have underage sex to young kids. Very different culture back then than in the States.
Yeah, definitely.
And so many good bands coming out at the time, like Accept's just starting to hit their stride. No, we bought like the Acid Maniac record out of Belgium.
Yep.
Yeah.
Kate.
First of all, Fate started going. I feel like the repercussions of the new wave of British heavy metal across Europe spawned all of these amazing bands.
Absolutely. That was it for, me, living in Orange County, just south of Los Angeles back then. Of course, we had the fanzines, Metal Mania, Slagle had New Heavy Metal Review, and that, inspired me to start my zine. And then that got into the tape trading, and it was all about the British metal, a new wave of British heavy metal. Of course, we knew of Scorpions. And then the second band was probably Crocus when Metal Rendezvous, because that came out domestically. When that first came out, Metal Rendezvous. Right. Then I got into Accept, the I'm a Rebel record, before Breaker came out. That was actually on Gem Records, had that released. And I picked that up at like a Music Plus. And we're talking, 1980, I guess. And that was kind of my introduction to, wow, these bands out of Jersey, there's not just Scorpions, you know. And then you're right, from there, like between 80 and 85, it just was like an onslaught of not just German, but the Dutch bands, all those Dutch bands, Picture, Bodine. I mean, you had so many of those Dutch bands. You know, we read Aardschok. I was pen pals with, you know, Stefan and Metal Mike, and we would get their magazine. And although we couldn't read that or Rock Hard or Shock Power, we just saw the name of the bands and we would check them out. And then I remember Trance, that were kind of the Scorpions clones, and there was another band called Bullet who were kind of like Accept. Fisk were French, weren't they?
Yeah, I think so.
Trust, of course, Ocean. You know the cool thing about that is when you look back, all those bands had kind of a distinct sound to their territory, to their country. Like the German bands, you know, they used to call it kraut metal, the kind of spacey prog rock, but it kind of turned into the Scorpions meets Accept sound. And they all kind of had that sound. The Dutch bands had kind of a new wave of British heavy metal sound. All the Swedish bands back then, you know, Silver Mountain, you know, early Europe, you know, all those bands.
Always super melodic.
Very melodic, but very classy.
Even if they were heavy, even if they were really heavy, still.
Sure, even Torch and Overdrive and all those bands, they all had a real great melodic feel. It always had a killer guitar player, very kind of Deep Purple influence, but you kind of knew, oh, that they're from Sweden. That's that Swedish sound. And then the French had, you know, apart from most of the French bands sang in French, you know, Swordless, H-Bomb, you know, of course, Trust, Warning, Ocean, Voix du Fée.
H-Bomb and
H-Bomb. But they had a certain classiness. You kind of knew they were from France, you know, and that you kind of miss that. Nowadays, you know, bands that come out of Europe, they could sound just like any American new metal band or whatever. But back then, I thought that was exciting. Each country kind of had its own sound. And then, like you said, Germany just exploded with all those bands, Rage, Gravedigger, Creator, Sodom, Destruction, you know, Tankard, of course.
Vendetta and Paradox and Running Wild.
Halloween,
they were massive back in the day.
Halloween, of course.
They were from Switzerland, but Celtic Frost from Switzerland, Corona from Switzerland, Drift, tons of bands, Assassin, Violent Force. Tons of bands came like in the mid-'80s, influenced by American bands, by British bands, by Venom, by Metallica, of course, by Slayer, but also by Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, because Iron Maiden was always pretty big in Germany, and not as big as in the UK, but very big. So these bands influenced most of the German bands, and everybody took their own influences and made something special out of it. And so, yes, I agree. German bands have usually a unique sound till today. And the same goes with like bands from Sweden and France and other places. But it's probably not that strongly this own sound these days as it used to be, because we are living in one world more than ever because of all the culture transfers and stuff like that. So but I totally agree. And Germany always had a special sound when it came to metal.
Absolutely. It's funny when the heavier bands came through, like, you know, of course, Sweden now is known for, you know, the death metal bands, and of course Norway for their black metal bands. But early '80s, Sweden was very melodic. Norway, you know, you had TNT, and then, you know, of course, Germany, like you said, you had Sodom, Destruction, Creator, Coroner from Switzerland, Celtic Frost, and Bathory from Sweden. Of course, all these the heavier bands, a lot of them obviously influenced by Venom. I know that's kind of your specialty, Ian. How did that affect you when the new breed of thrash and death metal coming out of Europe?
Well, I guess for me, that kind of came arm in arm with getting into tape trading, right? So it's like you get into all the classic stuff and weed through and figure out, you know, Scorpions, it's heavier than Deep Purple, and, you know, that stays, that goes, Judas Priest, and get all the basic heavy metal records together, and then all of a sudden things changed, and Slayer and Metallica accelerated and modernized and brought it down to earth. All of this metal that had been, you know, the formative stuff. For me, it was being into it in junior high and early high school. But then when everything intensified again and started to get more deathly, well, that was my leap into tape trading. For me, tape trading began with thrash, and I got to experience all of the very first death metal stuff. Like I got into tape trading, started getting Metallica and Slayer tapes, and then, and here's Death. What's this? Wow, this is something. Or I traded with a guy up in Michigan who was sending me the Genocide demos, the band that became Repulsion.
I remember that, yeah.
All of a sudden it's like, whoa, this tape trading thing is its own world. And bands are creating a sound that's all based on the other cassettes they're hearing, and the record labels matter a little bit less. And also geography mattered a little bit less, because all of a sudden with that first wave of death metal, you've got like bands from Ohio and Michigan and Florida and Sweden and all of those bands that poured out of South America. All of a sudden, like, it wasn't just a conversation between America and Europe anymore.
True.
And in the UK, all of a sudden, like, and here are 50 bands from Brazil,
Yeah.
We're still finding out about all this stuff. Like, somebody put out this book of Chilean metal, and I knew the band Pentagram, and that's about it. There's a book, that has probably 500 bands. They had a military dictatorship, and the army would chase down kids coming out of shows and hold them down and cut their hair, and incredible experiences. Like,
sounds like the Cuckoo's Nest in Orange County back in the day.
Yeah, exactly.
If you had long hair, that's crazy. It's funny because I always thought I knew all the new wave of British heavy metal bands back in the day. I had all the singles, I knew everything. And then I read that book. I can't remember who put that out, but it was like an encyclopedia of new wave of British heavy metal.
That's one of my favorite. That's one of the best 5 books about metal.
It's fantastic, and like almost half the bands I never heard of, and it makes you wonder how big actually were these bands. And not a lot of them were great. I went back and got some of their records and their stuff, but it's just unbelievable how big the scene really was. Compared to how big I knew about it, being this fan from California, I thought I knew everything about it. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, same here. I probably just know 5 or 10% of those bands because my colleague who also works for Rock Hard magazine, Matthias Mader, I'm pretty sure he's doing IP. It's a publisher.
Known him since the 80s too, since Iron Pages.
Didn't you do something with Iron Pages for your book publishing? I know you did the Slayer book, but I thought you did something with Iron Pages. No,
not yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Not yet. But Matthias,
I'd like to put out that new wave of British heavy metal encyclopedia because he's actually the one that put that out. But
okay.
He's a freak. I mean, he knows every band, I think, and he's done about 35 Iron Maiden concerts with various members from very back in the day, and managers and roadies and whatever, and that's always in Rock Hard magazine in the printed version. So he's done tons of interviews on Maiden, but also on very, very small bands and bands I've never heard about. And I always wonder what happened in the 80s. I was a big metalhead, and why I don't know this. To be honest, I wasn't such a big new wave of British heavy metal fan. I was more into the thrash scene in the US. So that's probably one of the reasons I leaned more towards the US, and also started with hardcore bands in the 80s with the Chromax and Agnostic Front and Gangrene and Circle Jerks and stuff like that.
Wow.
So I always had a favor for punk and hardcore music as well, but I was mainly into thrash, so new wave of British heavy metal is not my expertise.
It's interesting how so many fans from Europe were obviously into the U.S. bands, not only the thrash bands, but a lot of those underground punk bands and some of the bands that were just coming out of L.A. and stuff. I talked to a lot of people in Germany and Europe, and they, collected the vinyl, and there were a lot of bands that were. I remember all these bands when I was trading vinyl back in the early 80s. A lot of them would want some of the punk 12-inch Circle Jerks and that kind of stuff. And Stepmothers, I don't know if you remember Stepmothers, kind of a metal thrash band, because they were from the Inland Empire. And I had easy access to these records, and they didn't. And I would get the greatest German and Dutch imports from these people. But there were a lot of those kind of bands that I was surprised that a lot of the Europeans were familiar with, because they were just like local bands in L.A. And then of course the Snow EP and all the other, the first Motley Crue single and August Red Moon EP and all that. So that's what I was trading and getting other stuff back. It was exciting. But Buffo, you managed Tankard since 1986, which is, I always loved that band. The one thing I got to say about Tankard is I thought it was
20,000 years ago.
Yeah, they were, it was so cool because they were just a fun band that were just all about drinking and getting fucked up, and I thought that was refreshing because it came out when all the bands were starting to get into the whole satanic thing, and I thought that kind of got silly after Venom and after a few of the bands I kind of got turned off a bit about death metal, and here's this band Tankard that are just playing music about getting fucked up and drunk, and I thought, wow, this is cool. Of course, for a young teenager, you're like, yeah, all right.
I was impressed too when I saw the first show of the guys. I didn't manage them that back in the day. That was, I think, 85, and I started 86. I knew the singer Gareth from going to the football, to the soccer stadium, so I knew him quite well. And he asked me, can you manage us? And I said, no, I have to start a new job and everything. And then a couple of weeks later, I fired myself from that new job, and I told Gareth, hey, I can do the management. I don't know how, but I can do it. I got some connections to people in the business, magazines and stuff. So I started in 86. And ever since I'm doing that. And it's been a great journey. It's never been really easy because we never did that like a full professional band like Creator or Destruction or other bands. We've always just been semi-professional, which means we only played twice in the US. But we did a lot of tours in South America. We played Japan and we played Australia and, of course, almost all over Europe, but only about 30 shows a year. So never real big tours and stuff like that. And we never made really a living out of the music. So, and we still keep going. And in the moment, it's difficult because we are not allowed to play. All festivals are canceled. All concerts are canceled. Hopefully, we can play again next year. And and celebrate 40 years of Tankard in 2022 then.
All right. Great to see the band still going strong, man. I love that.
Yeah, me too.
The festivals you mentioned, I know Tankard's done quite a bit of them. I know Germany is obviously the king of metal festivals, from, Wacken to the Headbangers Open Air to the, Rock Hard. I'm forgetting all the festivals now. But, you have so many festivals there, in Germany and Holland, and that must be horrible for the summer. Are all the festivals canceled? Are they kind of waiting to see or pushing it back to September? What's going on there?
No, the festival season is already over at that way because like in September and October, the weather is starting to get shittier. And so the risk would be too high to play a week in the rain or something like that. So the festival season is over. We hope for next year. We already have plenty of shows for Tankard. I booked plenty of shows for them. This summer, the Bang Your Head Festival is one example, and also a couple of other festivals. But all these festivals are canceled now due to the coronavirus, which is a pain in the ass, not only in Germany, in all other countries as well, because there's high financial losses coming with that cancellations. And it's so terrible, and a lot of people are really depressed because they're not going for a week, or they're not going to the Summer Breeze Festival or to the Headbangers Open Air or wherever the festivals are and have fun and meet people and drink and smoke weed and whatever, see great bands, small bands, big bands, and now everything is gone for at least, I think, this year, and maybe it comes back next year. But before there isn't a vaccine, it might be tricky to do huge concerts and festivals and stuff like that. So, it's terrible, and a lot of bands are getting probably bankrupt, and festivals getting bankrupt.
Yeah.
And this disease is killing so many businesses all over the world. It's very bad in the U.S. I follow that very closely. So fucking bullshit. Sorry.
That's depressing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, especially for Europe, because the summertime is the time where people get out all over Europe, and festivals are such a huge part of not just the metal scene. Just the huge part of the European culture, going out to these music festivals. And I understand Oktoberfest they already canceled, and so people are going to be really depressed because that's kind of the season where they get out and about and get away from the winter cold. It really sucks, especially in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. In the moment, I think most people are managing, but I don't know if that keeps going for much longer. There might be huge problems in some countries in Europe because if you sit at home the whole day and not even allowed to work, some people are not even allowed to work in the moment, or just work bits and pieces and stuff like that. So, and you have to wear masks, and you have to stay away from foreigners or even family members if they live in a different city. So I don't know how much people will take, and it's much worse in the UK, for example, and in France and in Spain, Italy, Germany, or Switzerland, Austria are doing better, and Denmark. But you never know if there's a second wave in the fall or the winter, and how everything is going to happen, how everything is developing over the next couple of years. So these are definitely grim times.
It seems like Belgium is getting hammered, but I haven't even heard anything from there, but just looking at the numbers.
I saw that too. Belgium's getting hit pretty hard.
You know what just was canceled last weekend? Sirius XM at Keep It True Festival.
Wow. Right, yeah. Oliver's doing that.
You know, it's amazing that bands talk about Sirius XM, because they were one of the early, that was one of the records I was trading too. That and the Warlord and bands like that were huge in demand in Europe. But that first Sirius XM record, that must have come out, in 81? And the band never really played much, at least they were from Ventura, which is kind of up the center of the coast. So it was still about like 3 hours away from LA. I know they did like a Roxy show, a couple shows in LA, but they were not, like an LA local band like everyone thinks, playing the LA circuit. And to see that they've made such a huge comeback and they're playing all these European festivals, some 40 years later is pretty astonishing.
And they also put a new record out on Metal Blade Records these days, Sirius XM. There's a new album.
Yeah.
I just downloaded it a couple of days ago. So, and I kind of liked it.
It's good. It's very different. It doesn't have the freak factor, I think, that the early records did, but it's a good record.
Yeah, I liked it too.
Is it still Tim Baker singing?
Yes, but he's somehow they mellowed it out.
Oh, yeah?
It's not as over the top.
Right. Very cool. Well, Ian, talk about some of the early demos. You talk about some of the tape trading and stuff from back in the days.
There are a couple of things that are like crossing my mind while we're talking about all this stuff. I want to talk about Merciful Fate in a second, because I think that's kind of like the finest of the European bands of this time period that we're talking about. Yeah. But before that, AC/DC Mania in Germany in the early 80s. It was like the Beatles had come and found an adolescent male audience, and people were just like losing their minds for AC/DC, for beginning probably with Highway to Hell, and then going through the next 5 years. I wondered, Buffo, did you experience any of that? That it was over the top? AC/DC everything everywhere?
Yeah, I think I remember that. As I said, I started listening to heavy metal in 81 when I was 17. I was Saxon Strong Over the Law, and it was my brother who is 6 years older. He had quite a good collection, but mainly normal rock music, but a few metal albums as well, because his girlfriend at that time, she was a big AC/DC fan. I remember that. But I listened to Saxon, so that was my first band, and then Maiden followed, and Judas Priest, and Molly Hatchet and Motorhead. So I was never really fond on AC/DC, strangely enough. But of course, I saw them once or twice, or probably more often in the 80s. But I remember, yes, you're correct. They were pretty huge in Germany. I don't know how huge they were, like in the US, for example, or in the UK, but they were massive here. That's for sure. Mm. But I never been a big fan, so I didn't follow them too much.
And when I was a kid, I remember one Saturday night, there was like a Saxon concert on German TV.
All right. Yeah. Rock popping concert.
Yeah. Imagine that in the U.S., wow. What's on TV? Oh, how about an hour-long show starting with a 10-minute version of Dallas 1 p.m.
Oh, wow.
Hey, guys, that was so amazing. I've been there both days myself with a couple of friends from Frankfurt. We drove up there in Dortmund. That's just about 3 hours drive.
Wow.
Oh, that was 2 days, I think Friday and Saturday, and it was rock pop in concert, and we were totally surprised. Hey, they're doing a rock pop in concert show in Dortmund 2 days with a lot of metal and hard rock bands. Let's go there. And they had Quiet Riot, Saxon, and who else? Quiet Riot, I mentioned Judas Priest. Who else was playing? Scorpions.
Loudness?
No, I don't think Loudness. I can't even remember. Shit, I should have looked.
What festival was this?
A rock pop in concert. That was in Dortmund, I think in 80. 1982, and that was 2 days in a pretty big venue. MSG
Michael Schenker was.
MSG, yeah, right.
MSG. Now there was Pink Pop too. Now that Pink Pop was in Holland, correct?
In Holland, yeah, I think.
That was a pretty big.
The concert was only a one-off. It was 2 days. I think a Friday and a Saturday in Dortmund, Westfalenhalle, pretty big venue, and I think 8 bands each day or something like that. And a lot of Americans. Ozzy Osbourne, I think, was playing as well. Iron Maiden, right, as we mentioned, MSG, and a few others. And that was amazing. I mean, we were so amazed seeing all these bands together in 2 days. We bought tickets, and I think we slept in the car and had a lot of beers and stuff like that. I mean, that's almost 40 years ago now. So, whatever.
It's important to mention, Bob, that the drinking age in Germany is the legal drinking age is 16.
Yeah. I remember that. I remember all my pen pals telling me that way because I was 16 when I started writing to these guys and they were talking about drinking. And of course we would, I mean, even at 16, 17, I would go to the Woodstock and Radio City and Concert Factory and I would be able to drink there. All the clubs there were all ages. So I would usually have somebody else order me a beer and sometimes they would catch you and they would just give you a scolding. And I used to kind of promote some shows there with my magazine. So I kind of knew the guys, but they would say, "Hey dude, you can't be drinking, man." It's just kind of that thing. But it wasn't a thing where you could just drink freely, which like in Europe and even there were some states in the U.S. I remember, I think, like Arizona, when we went to Arizona with Armored Saint, the drinking age was 19 and we had all turned 19. It was like, we get to drink in the bars. But yeah, that's crazy. 16 years old.
Yeah. You're allowed to drink officially only beer and wine when you're 16. When you turn 18, you can also drink like schnapps, like vodka and whiskey and stuff like that. So, but that was always the case like this, and it has something to do with our culture. And I don't think that we have many more alcoholics than you guys have in the U.S. Even with that low age. I don't think so.
Well, I know, like all over Europe, as far as like a drinking and drive-in, there's a lot more respect for that in Europe than there is in the U.S. Like people that have 1 or 2 beers, they don't drive, and people adhere to that over there. Whereas here, it's all right, I could drive, So I think it's a much bigger issue here as far as drinking and driving and probably even alcoholism. I mean, the cool thing about Europe and Germany, I mean, people drink to have fun. It's like to celebrate, whereas, I think people, mostly alcoholics, they drink because they're miserable, but it's just more of a celebratory thing, especially in Germany with Oktoberfest and all that. Like everybody drinks, it's not looked down upon or it's just looked upon as just, partying, having a good time, which it should be.
I remember when I was one of the first times in the U.S., I think in the mid-'80s or something like that, in the Bay Area, I rented a car at Alamo, and I was driving up from L.A. to San Francisco to the Bay Area. I stayed with Alexis Olsen, the guy who managed Legacy Testament back in the day.
Sure.
So I stayed with him. He was living between Berkeley and Auckland. I think it was Berkeley, and the next street was Auckland, or the other way around.
He had the big parties at his house, right?
Yeah. It was cool. Thing was, I was already 21 at that stage, and I think he was like 19, but he had his own flat because his dad paid him an own flat, so I stayed at this place. And there was like a Jack in the Box on the other side of the street, and next to the Jack in the Box, there was a liquor store. And so every morning when I woke up, I went to the liquor store and bought a real big case of the cheapest beer they had, called Heidelberg. The guys working at the liquor store, they knew me after a couple of days, and of course I had to show them my ID, and that was a German passport, of course, because I didn't have a driving license like the Americans have. So they were studying my passport the first couple of times, but then they knew me, and they gave me the beer without looking at it. And I always went over to Alexis then, and then we had a bunch of beers, and he was like bragging with me. I got this German dude here. He's staying here at my flat for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. He's like hell. He's starting to drink beer in the morning, and he's still drinking.
What are you doing drinking cheap American beer, Buffo? Come on, you're German. You're supposed to drink the high-quality European beer, man.
Heidelberg. Close enough.
Well, dude, let's talk about Merciful Fate, because that EP was a definite game changer when that first EP came out on Rave On Records. I remember getting the advance from the guys at Ard Shock, and that absolutely blew me away. And then the Eindhoven live concert. Remember that one? That was one of the classic concert cassettes. I think it was like a 90-minute cassette live in Eindhoven. Those two, and then of course the demos, demo 1, 2, and 3. Total game changer when that came out. What was your experience, Ian?
I got into them when Melissa came out, right in that first crop of like Exciter. The first crop of Megaforce records,
right,
were insane, right? It was like
Violence
Kill 'Em All,
yeah.
All for One, Exciter's Violence and Force, Manowar Into Glory Ride, and the first Anthrax, and this Merciful Fate Melissa record, which was just like totally, it was a debut record, but totally perfected and just reeking of all of this kind of atmosphere and sounding pretty convincing as far as spooky, witchy, satanic stuff.
Absolutely.
I saw them in '82 in Hertogenbosch in Holland with Rave Except, I think, Trance, and was Venom headlining? I'm not sure, but I remember seeing them there in like an old fabric hall or something like that, like a big warehouse. And I remember buying these gray T-shirts they had. It was the front cover of the EP they did, the Merciful Fate EP. And I bought that at that show, and I think I sold it years later. I sold it for a little fortune to somebody else because I wasn't too keen on T-shirts anymore. And I remember seeing them back at that festival, and even though King Diamond's vocals were a little bit squeaky, I really dig the band because they were cool dudes from Denmark, cool country, and a few great musicianship on the contrary to Venom, who were like more like punk or whatever you're gonna call it. So I really love Merciful Fate. Yeah, great band.
Absolutely, and the changes. It reminded me of just a total upgraded Black Sabbath. Where they could just go into one song they could have easily made it into 4 songs. It's got just. Yeah. 4 just unbelievably killer riffs that changes the direction of the song, and it's like, man, this is unbelievable. How they come up with the concept to write this kind of music. Those early Merciful Fate albums were brilliant.
Yeah, and also I think also the first couple of King Diamond is pretty amazing. Fatal Portrait was, I think, great album, and a few others they released afterwards were pretty good too, but after a couple of years, I lost a little bit track of the band, but I agree. The Merciful Fate stuff is amazing, groundbreaking, I would even say. And the first 1 or 2 or 3 King Diamond records are amazing as well. So all the credit goes to the King.
Absolutely. But Buffo, when the 90s hit, it seems like the German metal, it kind of, of course you had Halloween, who were huge worldwide, and that kind of started the whole, I wouldn't say started it, but it really emphasized the power metal music, and a lot of the German bands, and you had that symphonic power metal and all the bands, Ed Guy, Advantasia, Blind Guardian, all these bands kind of, it really redirected the sound. And then you had bands like, Primal Fear and Sinner kind of doing that more traditional Judas Priest sound. And the production was a lot bigger, a lot more, I would say, digital sounding in the 90s. Whereas, the cool thing about those early 80s records is it really had that analog feel. But the 90s really changed in Germany. It seemed that to me, although I loved a lot of those bands, obviously, Germany kind of lost a bit of the German identity when it comes to, traditional German metal sound.
I think you're probably right. It's hard for me to judge on something like that because I'm from the country we're talking about. But I guess you're right. It probably had something to do with like new technologies coming into the studios. People were using computers to record stuff like that, and probably Germans are more fond of computers than others. I don't know.
Well, it actually happened all over. I shouldn't just pinpoint Germany. I'm just saying that as because Germany always had a very unique kind of sound. Yeah.
Well, it was like it was the counterbalance, way more in a traditional, almost kitschy traditional direction to counterbalance America going in the Korn direction.
Right.
And neither one was really that appetizing, really. And I was happy for all the good bands coming out of Norway and Sweden.
Well, I really appreciated that the bands really stuck true to their traditional metal roots. Again, I love Primal Fear, and even, people talk about, Hammerfall and bands like that, or even Manowar going back, but you could say, it's kind of silly, but you listen back to some of the music, and some of it's pretty damn heavy and pretty damn cool. And I think only in Germany, even the American bands like Manowar and even bands like Iced Earth or say Jag Panzer or whatever, they could make a career in Germany or in Europe rather than here in the States where they're from, playing that traditional sounding metal, whereas most bands you can't in America can't do that, and I think that's cool. I respect that. I mean, Manowar obviously are still huge.
The German fans, it's a lifelong dedication, and you respect it a lot.
That's what a lot of fans say, that the German fans are pretty dedicated. But I also heard that about the fans from Greece, that they're real dedicated people, and
Absolutely.
From other countries in Southern Europe, Italy, and places like that. I think it's a mentality thing. The Germans are probably not as enthusiastic as Greek persons or people, but they're really loyal, stick to their bands they like. Usually, they are not so trendy. The UK, in comparison, is much more trendy. The music market always has been. They're always more fond of these Korn and bands from Limp Bizkit from the US. They were never really big in Germany. So I think we have a traditional sense of music when it comes to heavy metal. Not everybody, but a lot of people. And that's, of course, good for bands like Manowar and a few others who never really made it in the States, but been pretty huge over here.
In Greece, they don't have the big festivals and everything they do in Germany. So I think for a band just to tour in Greece is, I can understand their enthusiasm. I mean, you would think by now the Germans would have, with so many great festivals every year, you would think they would have kind of got over the metal, but they still love the traditional metal, which I think is great, man. I love it.
Oh, you meet these guys that have like Vakken wristbands going back to 1992, They never took off the first one, and now it's practically the sleeve of a shirt every year, just adding to it.
It's the pride.
Yeah, but Vakken is extremely huge these days. I think they sell 75,000 tickets, people from all over the world, and they have a big program around the bands, and they have many stages and stuff like that. So that's not for everybody. I mean, it's not for me. I used to be there quite often when they were smaller, and I have immense respect for the people who are like organizing the festival 25 or whatever years now. But for myself, I prefer smaller festivals, like you mentioned the Headbangers Open Air Festival.
That's a great one.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, that's in the garden of the promoter who lives outside Hamburg.
Right.
And nowadays, I think he has like 2,000 people or something like that. That's more my kind of festival, like the smaller ones. But of course, Wacken and Summer Breeze and all the other ones, they're immensely important for the market. And a lot of people love to go there from all over the world, also from the States, people traveling to Wacken.
I'm the same too. I think at our age, it's a little bit different. And when I was younger, it was like, fuck it, Well, when you get older, those big, 60,000 plus festivals is kind of, all right, I'm kind of over it. I'd rather go to a much smaller, intimate festival.
Like it or don't like it, it doesn't matter. It's not happening. Not in 2020.
I always keep thinking about how it is when hopefully next year we can see bands again and football matches and soccer matches and festivals. And especially how it is in the first couple days, weeks, how enthusiastic the people will be. Seeing their favorite bands again, going to their favorite festival again, support their club again. I mean, that be like being reborn or something like that. I mean, I don't know how it will be, but that's what I imagine, because it looks like that this year is pretty much over for this type of things I just mentioned. But hopefully, probably next spring or next summer, we are able to do these things again. And I can't wait, people going totally probably then, hopefully, and spend a lot of money on beer and music and football and whatever.
I think they'll probably start out slow. People will be kind of hesitant at first, but I think after it might take a little while, but I agree. I think people are going to be so enthusiastic to get out of it. It'll kind of be refreshing. And in a way, it's kind of refreshing, even the sense that, the air quality. I mean, you could actually see the mountains and everything now. I mean, it is what it is. It's, just got to deal with it. But like you say, hopefully by next year, everything will be back to normal. I'm hoping by the summer, things are going to start getting back to normal. But I think it'll be a bit of a slow process.
It will be, yeah.
Ian, when it came to bands like, because I remember Sodom, Destruction, and Creator, then Coroner, they all came around early 80s, Celtic Frost. Do you say Celtic or Celtic Frost, Ian?
Celtic Frost.
Celtic Frost, okay. I know so many people say Celtic, Celtic. No, it's Celtic. No, it's Celtic. But anyway, those bands, how did that relate to the American thrash bands? Because I remember Sodom and Destruction, those albums coming out, what year did they come out?
Well,
Was that 82,
I think
83?
it started around 84.
Okay, it was 84. Okay, for some reason I was thinking that was before.
Licensed everything all at once. So you had Morbid Tales, the first Sodom EP, the first Destruction EP, that Madness. That's such a crazy EP. The most like frantic burst of something like that people heard. And Creator, Endless Pain, I think is 85 on Noise Records. But it was just kind of like this wave of German bands and Celtic Frost and Hellhammer coming out from Metal Blade in 83, 84.
Okay. Because I remember the demos at Headbang. I think they were, I know Hellhammer had that early demo, and I think some of those other bands had demos, because I'm trying to think it was 83, 84 when those demos came out, no?
Yeah, it's like 82, 83.
Okay. Because I thought they were fairly early on. Of course, Venom were the godfathers of that. No matter, as Buffo says, they weren't the greatest musicians, but I think really one of the most influential bands in heavy metal, just because you look at so many bands that took after them, the whole satanic thing, it all directly or indirectly goes back to Venom.
I know from Tom from Sodom that he was highly, hugely influenced by Venom. Sure. And obviously also by Motorhead by Lemmy and the band Tank from England.
Of course,
one of my favorites.
Right.
Of course, Tank, and I think also Slayer when they released the first record. So also Creator. I mean, the first couple Creator releases were sounding a lot like Slayer, I think. But then with Terrible Eternity, they were starting to develop their own sound, and I mean, all those German bands were all, I think, hugely influenced by Venom, but also Judas Priest and Motorhead and Metallica, and even bands like Exciter and Anvil and all these early metal bands from the UK and the US and Canada, and they made it into their own sounds after a couple records, after a couple of years, and they're doing that ever since. All those bands are still around. I think it's amazing.
Now, some of the German bands you mentioned, Running Wild, who were real big. I remember Gravedigger. I remember Living Death. I mean, there were a lot of these bands. Cutty Sark.
Iron Angel,
that was another one. I think they were a little bit later, but a lot of those. And then, of course, you got the real early bands that a lot of people don't talk about, like Night Sun, that had a very doomy kind of sound. There was a lot of German bands that are now just starting kind of making a wave here in America. But what do you remember Buffo about? I know you were a little bit younger, but you said you didn't really get into metal till 81. From older brothers or whatever, how was it like in the 70s, the transition from, Scorpions into Accept? Obviously, bands like, the international bands, AC/DC, Sabbath, all those bands were huge in Germany. Was there kind of a scene when you first got into metal in 81, or did it just kind of snowball after 82, 83?
I mean, my first concert was Saxon with Ozzy Osbourne in Offenbach, the town next to Frankfurt. And originally there was Riot was the opening act, but Riot couldn't play, so a German band called Revolver was playing. But Ozzy played and Saxon as well, and there have been a couple of thousand people there. So I suppose there was already like a scene there, but it was my first ever concert, so it was like a culture shock to me. I went there with the girlfriend of my brother and my brother, so that was really a unique kind of thing. And that was my first show, and I don't remember what my second show was, but I started going constantly to shows from 81 or 82, and I saw a lot in the early, mid-80s. So the scene was already there when I saw my first concert, but I don't know how that scene developed from the 70s into the 80s, because in the 70s I was listening to Pink Floyd and Manfred Mann's Earth Band and Sweet and a few other bands, Taylor and some German artists, so it was more like a rock pop kind of music background I had in the 70s, and then in 81 that changed into metal. So I'm not the best person to talk about that. Alex G might know more about this kind of topic. I don't know when he started listening to hard rock and metal, probably about the same time as me, but I can't tell you.
Yeah, I just find it interesting because Germany obviously now is the capital of heavy metal music and has been for the last, 20 some odd years. And still obviously going strong and all over Europe. I mean, the Italian bands, I remember early on Vanadium and Shining Blade and Electric Drive and the bands, from Spain, Baron Rojo. There were bands from all over Europe in the early 80s that just kind of sprouted out, kind of like the new wave of British heavy metal. You're just like, wow, check this band out.
And it's the same that once you really dig into it, nowadays you can find out that there were every band that we knew about in the States, there were 100 more.
Exactly.
But there were 100 Spanish heavy metal bands and 5,000 Italians.
Well, the thing about that, like a lot of the Spanish bands, they sang in their native language, as did the French bands. So a lot of them didn't really cross over. Right. To America. And the other thing, a lot of these bands, they release demos, particularly like we talked about the new wave of British heavy metal bands, because to release vinyl, people don't realize that was a big deal back in the 80s. Even, the LA bands that released vinyl, I use, like the first Metal Massacre, for example, but just Metallica having a song on a compilation record on vinyl, they could get gigs just off that because that was a big deal to have a record out. Because, you had the certain labels, especially in England, Neat Records, Heavy Metal Records, Ebony, and then you had, a few other...
Don't forget Heavy Metal Records.
Yeah, Heavy Metal Records, yeah, of course.
Heavy Metal Records. What kind of records do they put out?
Yeah, they did those killer compilations, Heavy Metal Heroes, and so much cool stuff coming out of there. But
Witchfinder General, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Desolation Angels.
Was that on Heavy Metal Records?
Yeah, I think so.
What's funny is they came to L.A. in the late 80s, and they kind of established themselves in L.A., and I think I saw them at the Roxy, but they lived in L.A. for quite a while, and then I heard, these guys are from England. They're like a new wave of British heavy metal band. It's like, no way. And sometimes you would get a lot of these bands, like Astaroth from Italy. They moved to Los Angeles for a while.
What?
Yeah.
You must have seen Angel Witch when Kevin Hebron was based.
I did. I saw them at the Troubadour, and they were good, but it was a little bit disappointing because, they did some of the earlier stuff, which was great. But the thing about a lot of those bands, the new wave British heavy metal bands, they put out incredible debut records, like Angel Witch or Tank, Diamond Head, Satan too, yeah, Court in the Act. What a great record, and they were really never able to. Diamond Head's a good example. Even though those records, Borrow Time and stuff, were good, they were nothing like the original. And I think so many of those bands tried to change their sound. Tigers of Pantank, perfect example. Saxon even later.
I think it's the Def Leppard effect.
It was in England. I think everyone tried to be Def Leppard. Production-wise, they were trying to get that, that paper bag snare sound and all that kind of stuff. But it really, of course, you look at the bands that really stuck it out, Iron Maiden, of course, Def Leppard, but, Motorhead, Iron Maiden, and Saxon to an extent, they kind of stuck to their guns. But, I think Angel Witch could have been just as huge if they were able to follow up that debut record.
It's quite often, I think, the case that the debut album of a band is probably the best album. For Metallica, my favorite Metallica album is still Kill 'Em All, even though Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets are amazing. And with Exodus, I love Fabulous Disaster, but Bonded by Blood, I think that's their best one. And other bands, I prefer the debut. But sometimes the second or third record is much better in ways of production and songwriting and everything. The first record, like the first Death Angel record, the Ultraviolence, sounds a bit like a demo, but it has a lot of charm, It's very authentic. And a lot of bands lose that after the first record because they sold quite a bit of the first record, and then the record company is saying, we got to sell more with the next one and go more in this and that direction, and they get influenced by, and the musicians are getting better, and they have less time to record the songs for the second album. So a lot of reasons why second or third albums are sometimes not as good as the debut, even though they are better produced and probably better played and with a better sound and everything.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I love the charm of that kind of raw production, that real analog production. I mean, that's why, a lot of people listen to some of the old new wave of British heavy metal and they can't listen to it because of the production, but there's a certain charm about that, which I find great. And there's a great article I think it was in the thread, Ian, that Ed Rivadavia wrote about the debut Exodus record in Discogs, I believe. But it is kind of true with some of the thrash bands too. I know a lot of them tried to change their sound. I mean, look at Celtic Frost. A lot of bands got caught up in that, especially in the mid '80s. And I think you're right. What you say, Buffo, was really pushed upon with the record companies, especially once they got American deals and they wanted to push producers and songwriters on them, just to get that hit, that MTV hit, and they would change their look. And, it's really not the band's fault in a sense. And they don't realize till afterwards, And it's funny, it's the bands that really stuck to their guns in the long run, I think, are the ones that really made more of an impact on a long-term situation.
Sometimes it's the money that comes in between the music. When a band is getting signed by a major label back in the day in the 80s, they were giving them tons of money, and that was confusing, I think, for a lot of bands. And you correctly said that they needed like a hit single or probably 2 hit singles, and then there was MTV coming up, and they needed a hit video and everything. So, the bands were irritated by the actions of the record companies and the managers and stuff like that. That happened, for example, to Warlock, the band of Doro Pesch. The first one was Burning the Bitches, but then the second one still pretty okay, but they were on a major label. And I think they were starting to think too much about money, and too much people were talking with them about the music, the A&R and the people at the record company distribution, the manager. Everybody's getting involved, and that confuses bands sometimes, and they're losing track. Or Raven, for example.
Raven's a good example, yeah.
After the Upswing All for One album, I think they did this, the Pack is Back or whatever.
Yeah, when they signed with Atlantic Records, yep.
Right, signed with Atlantic Records. And I mean, I couldn't believe we're back in the late 80s or whenever that happened. When I heard this album for the first time, I thought, that's not Raven anymore. Where's the Raven of the first 3 records, especially of All for One, which I think is amazing. I mean, some of those bands did that, and it was a mistake. And then they tried a couple of years later, they tried to go back to their old sound, but sometimes that wasn't so easy to win the old people back, because in the meantime you lost probably a lot of the old fans. So that's a dilemma.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of pressure on the bands. And there was a lot of pressure being dropped. I mean, the worst thing to happen is being signed by a major label and then being dropped the next day, or the next album. So, there was a lot of pressure. But should we kind of wind it down?
Let's see, any Western European countries that aren't getting their due credit?
I don't know. I know there's a lot of, like you mentioned, I mean, now discovering bands from Greece, and as you mentioned, even South America, and there were a lot from Australia. I mean, there were so many bands that were coming out of Europe in the 80s. I know there's definitely some countries we're missing out on. Of course, Finland, the band Oz, which is still together, just put out a new record, which, I think it's great seeing that these bands are still surviving, putting out great new music.
That was the first band to write a song about church burning.
I heard that. Is that true? Wow.
Turn the cross upside down,
Wow.
Turn the churches to the ground, turn the cross.
I remember that. The Fire in the Brain album, yeah.
Great sing-along.
Were church burnings actually happening then, or were they writing about it before the church burnings?
I think it was just a dream at that point.
Wow. They started it all. It's all their fault.
Turn the cross. Well,
they're the true lords of chaos.
The cover of Fire in the Brain is Quorthon's hand.
Is that? Oh, wow. I know they were close, because I know Jonas Auckland told me when they recorded the first Bathory song that was on the first compilation, he used the drummer from Oz's drum set. They were in the same studio, so I think it was the same producer or something. So there was obviously a connection there.
That's cool.
So, and they were Finnish. They weren't even Norwegian. It's funny how the whole Norwegian thing came across all of a sudden, because you had TNT and maybe a couple other real melodic commercial, bands, and then it went from that to just full on black metal.
Mayhem. Yeah, exactly.
There wasn't like, at least in Sweden, you kind of had, that jump from, going to the heavier bands like a Torch into, then you had like the Skin Trade and Clawfinger, and then you got into the real death metal stuff. Candlemass, the Doom band. Oh, great band. But you kind of had that build up, whereas Norway was just kind of went into melodic commercial rock to black metal. Like overnight.
Well, it's also a generational thing. Those kids that made those bands like Nihilists that became Entombed in Sweden and Mayhem in Norway, they were like 14, 15 when they started out.
That's true.
When the first Emperor record was done in the 90s, there were people in that band, I think, 16 years old.
Yeah. And, that was typical because all the, bands from L.A. or even, all over Europe, Yngwie was 18. Even go back to, AC/DC. Angus was 16, 17, Def Leppard, they were all 16, 17 years old when they started. Now they make such a big deal about, a band like Greta Van Fleet. So young. It's like, they're like 19. That's not, every band, Armored Saint, they were all 18 when they started. All the bands were pretty young.
Possessed. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Possessed were kids. Death Angel. Shit. Andy
right.
was 12, 11. That's just crazy.
It's crazy.
But, again, it comes down to, back then most of the clubs were all ages back then. Nowadays, kids 16, 17, they don't go out. They don't go out to concerts, and a lot of them, they can't go to clubs because most of them are 21 and over now. So that's really killed the scene.
I talked to Mark Segueda from Death Angel a couple of months ago, and he told me their parents had to sign their first record contract.
Sure.
Because they were underage. So
yeah, a lot of bands. That's the same with Jason Becker when he first signed with Mike Varney. He had to have his parents sign as a guardian.
That's cool. Death Angel, I think the drummer was Andy Gallon was about 15 or something like that, or 14 when they started the band, or 13. I don't know.
They started when he was like 11 when they were playing the clubs. Yeah, he was really young. And then I think when they signed, he might have been 14. Yeah. They first signed with Enigma, I think.
So anybody in your 20s looking to start a band, give up. You're way too late.
Well, I say anyone trying to start a metal band nowadays, go for it. You see bands now, which I think is funny, but it's cool. People our age that played back in the day, playing in local bands, they're back out playing again just for fun. They all have regular jobs and this and that, but they'll go out and they'll, open up for some big band in town or whatever. Or, when I say big band, it could be, like an LA Guns or Tesla, and just to go out and have fun, which I think is cool.
Look, we mentioned Sirathungal, but Sirathungal made a good record recently. Angel Witch's record from a couple years ago, those records are good.
That's a good one to bring up. Yeah, Angel Witch. Yeah.
And Satan's new stuff. It's like bands that kind of got, for some reason, either got sidetracked or had to make a pit stop for sometimes decades, can come back and they still have this like lightning in a bottle. And it's amazing when you see that working.
Well, I think they realize now that they made a mistake, and they realize now what their true fans want to hear. We're talking about like a lot of the thrash bands. I think some of those thrash bands, are putting out, whether it be Anthrax, Testament, Death Angel, Overkill, even Metallica. They're going back to their roots and putting out what, some of their best works, and they haven't lost it. I think they've kind of, like you said, a new energy, a new vibe. And, they kind of experimented in the past doing different stuff, seeing what works or not. And now they're just saying, fuck it, man. We just want to go out and play what we do best. And, you are seeing some of the best music coming out from a lot of these bands. Yeah. A lot of new wave of British heavy metal bands are reforming, The last Cloven Hoof record was great. Legend, Peter Hayworth has put out a couple, last couple albums they put out were fantastic. Yeah, a lot of great stuff coming out.
And then there are those bands like Hell and Pagan Altar that never even had an album until nowadays.
Yeah. It's funny. I was reading about a band that they formed in like the early 80s and they just put out their debut record just 2 or 3 years ago.
That was the story with Hell.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, I guess nowadays it's so easy to put a record together. It's not really a big thing. Whereas back in the day, you had to have a record label, to put out some vinyl. You could put it out on your own, but it was a pretty big task. So are we missing any countries here? To end this off, was there any other bands we should.
Luxembourg, Liechtenstein. I can't think of anything from coming out of there. So
Belgium, as you said, had a few bands. I know Acid were from Belgium, and
Bazillion Records, so they had their infrastructure in place.
that's right. And didn't they have Sucks magazine from Belgium? Disco is shit in a heavy metal zit pit. So they had some good festivals in Belgium too back in the day. I remember.
Yeah, they still have a good festival in Belgium. We played with Tankard there a couple of times called Grasspop Festival.
Oh, the Grass Pop, is that Belgium?
Yeah.
Okay, that's right. That's right.
20 or 30,000 people, something like that. So there's different stages, some 10 stages, open air stages. So that's in Belgium. That's a good festival too.
Oh shit! And Acid was supposed to play at Keep It True also, along with Celtic Frost. I mean, along with Sirathungal. So, shit, we got to get these festivals going again.
Yeah, I totally agree, dude.
Yeah. Well, I think next year it's going to come back stronger than ever, hopefully.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about everyone's worried about is that it's going to be so bombarded with bands that, and a lot of venues might not even last through this this quarantine. That's the other thing. So a lot of them are going to close down, and there's going to be so many bands with so few venues and so few festivals. It's going to be difficult, a lot more difficult for artists to get on some good bills.
Bring it on. We welcome them.
Absolutely, absolutely. But, like you say, Buffo, I think the enthusiasm will definitely come back. So people will definitely be anxious to get out and support their favorite metal bands. So, as you say, Ian, bring it on.
Bring it on.
All right, gentlemen. Well, in closing, why don't you guys give out some links or anything you guys want to promote or want to be contacted through social media or whatever? Buffo, what about you?
The Tankard website and the Tankard Facebook and the Rock Hard magazine.
And Ian, what do you got going on currently?
I just say, while you're stuck at home until these festivals come back, stock up on big, fat, giant metal books and come to BazillionPoints.com and follow at Bazillion Points and pick up Swedish Death Metal, Mentalian, The Slayer Mag Diaries, Only Death is Real, Choosing Death, and Down to the Beach.
Great books. And so people know it's not just death metal you put out. You put some great books on AC/DC and a lot of other bands. All right, guys.
Thanks, Bob.
All right. Take care, gentlemen. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bob, and nice meeting you, Ian. Let's keep in touch.
Yeah, see you one of these days.
Yeah, hopefully next year, maybe in Switzerland or Germany.
We'll have to pound a case of Heidelberg beer.
Yeah, I don't think you can get Heidelberg filled in Germany.
Come on, Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Harold O will send it to us from Oakland.
Yeah, probably. Best customer. Okay, guys, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you. Stay safe and stay healthy.
All right, guys, you take care.
Clean.
Thank you for listening to the Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast. Subscribe and listen to all episodes by going to our pages on iTunes, Spreaker, YouTube, Spotify, and more. You can listen to all other episodes and access up-to-date information and news on the Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast by going to our website at www.shockwaveskullsessions.com. Email all comments, questions, and suggestions to shockwaveskullsessions@gmail.com.